One sip of Mocha, and death took its turn. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Tell me where you're listening from. I love seeing how far these mysteries travel. Your comments always make this journey richer. Let's dive in. If you want to see Nero Wolfe irritated before lunch, mention one of three things: the Internal Revenue Service, the New York City subway system, or anyone who claims to know more about coffee than he does. The first is a necessary evil, the second an unnecessary one, and the third a provocation that might, under the right circumstances, end in bloodshed. It was 11:30 on a Thursday morning when the provocation arrived. Wolfe was in the plant rooms, attending to his orchids, and I was manning the fort in the office, typing up invoices, pretending to care about the margin on imported Sumatran beans, and keeping one eye on the door. It was the kind of quiet you can only get in a house that eats noise for breakfast. Then came the bell. The man who stepped into the brownstone had the confident gait of someone who owned a few too many imported blazers and didn't pay retail for any of them. He was about 40, slim, with hair that had been styled by either divine intervention or a $500 barber. His eyes had the glint of a man who thought the world was waiting for his next word. "Mr. Wolfe available?" he asked, scanning the room like a real estate agent. "Depends," I said. "You bringing orchids, money, or trouble?" He smiled, like I'd just complimented him. "Maybe all three. My name's Gerald Kent. I roast for the Kent and Crown Coffee Company. Perhaps you've heard of us?" "Can't say I have," I said, though I'd seen their name plastered on about half the city's overpriced cafe cups. He sat without asking, which put him on Wolfe's bad side already. "I've a problem that requires discretion and a certain mental precision. Your employer's name came up repeatedly." "Funny how it does," I said. "He's upstairs with his flowers. You can tell me what the problem is while I warn him someone's about to disturb his digestion." Kent leaned forward. "Someone's sabotaging us. Or me. We've just launched a new specialty roast, Mocha Elysium. It's supposed to be our masterpiece, but every test batch we send out tastes wrong. Bitter, off. I've checked the beans, the machinery, even the water. Nothing's wrong until it's in the cup. Then it's poison to the palate." "Could be a matter of opinion," I said. He shook his head. "I have competitors, Mr. Goodwin, and enemies. One of them is playing games with me, but that's not all." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small paper envelope, sealed and marked with a bold black K. "Yesterday, I found this slipped under my office door. Inside was a sample of our roast and a note that said, 'You'll taste your own ruin soon enough.'" That caught my attention, and not just because it sounded like bad poetry. I raised a brow. Threats over coffee beans. This city really does have everything. Kent's eyes flicked to the stairs. "Will he see me?" Wolfe came in just then, which meant I didn't have to answer. He filled the doorway like a verdict, massive, composed, wearing the expression of a man forced to attend his own trial. His eyes went to Kent, then to me, then to the clock. "You are early, Mr. Goodwin. It is not yet noon," Wolfe said. "The world doesn't wait for your schedule," I said. "Mr. Kent here thinks someone's turning his coffee into arsenic for the tongue. He wants help." Wolfe frowned, lowering himself into the red leather chair like an emperor settling onto his throne. "I detest melodrama. Coffee is not arsenic." Kent rose. "Mr. Wolfe, your reputation precedes you. I know you appreciate the sanctity of flavor. Imagine something you've perfected, corrupted without explanation. That is what I face, and now I'm being threatened." Wolfe closed his eyes briefly. "Mr. Kent, I'm not a chemist nor a guard dog. I do not test roasts or chase pranksters." Kent didn't flinch. "But you are a man who understands motive, and that's what this is about. Someone is destroying my work, my name, my business. They want to see me discredited before our product launches next week." I watched Wolfe. He didn't move, but I could tell he was thinking. The twitch of his mouth meant he was annoyed and interested. Kent pressed the point. "You drink coffee, Mr. Wolfe?" "That," Wolfe said coldly, "is a personal question, but yes, I drink it properly." "Then you'll understand. This isn't just about money. It's an assault on taste itself." That did it. Wolfe opened his eyes. "Archie, bring me that envelope." I did. He inspected it, sniffed the air above it, then looked back at Kent. "You have, by accident or design, appealed to my sensibilities. I dislike offenses to flavor. Sit down. I shall hear you." Kent exhaled in relief. Wolfe raised a finger. "But I warn you, sir, if this proves to be mere commercial squabbling or publicity masquerading as mystery, I shall eject you with prejudice. Archie will take your statement. I will decide thereafter whether to soil my thoughts with it further." Kent nodded. "Fair enough." As Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed again, I took out my notebook. What I didn't tell either of them was that I already knew Gerald Kent's name. 3 weeks earlier, I'd had coffee with a redhead named Marcia Vale, who wrote for Gourmet and Grit, and she'd mentioned a brilliant, ruthless roaster who'd made enemies faster than he made blends. She said if he didn't watch himself, he'd wind up the headline instead of the advertisement. I remember joking about it. Now, as I wrote down the first details of his story, I wasn't so sure it was funny. Wolfe decided the case was worth exactly 1 cup of his patience, and since he was already on his second, Gerald Kent got lucky. The man sat across from him, trying not to fidget, while I filled in the gaps between Wolfe's grunts of disapproval. The envelope lay on the desk between them like a dead insect, harmless looking, but with something poisonous inside. Wolfe tapped the corner of it with one thick finger. "You said this was found under your office door." "When?" "Yesterday morning, around 8. The cleaning crew opens up before I arrive. My assistant, Lila Hahn, found it and brought it to me." "Have you shown it to anyone else?" Wolfe asked. "No, I didn't want the press hearing about it. We've had too many leaks lately." Wolfe's eyes opened, sharp and glinting. "Leaks? You suggest that your private affairs have become public?" Kent hesitated. "We've had disagreements inside the company. Creative differences, as the magazines like to say. My partner, Alan Crown, wants to expand into mass retail, grocery store blends, licensing deals. I'm more particular. We argue, but nothing serious." I scribbled that down. "And who else knows your formula for this Mocha Elysium roast?" 5 people, including myself. Alan, Lila, our chief taster, Gavin Holt, and a marketing consultant we hired for the launch. Name's Beatrice Leung. "That's quite a circle for something you call proprietary," I said. Kent shot me a look that said he didn't appreciate editorial commentary. They're all trusted professionals. Or they were. Wolfe's brows drew together. "Mr. Kent, when you say the flavor is corrupted, you mean chemically altered?" "I've had every batch analyzed," Kent said. "No contamination, but the taste is wrong, bitter, dry, like the beans were roasted too long. Except they weren't. I supervise every roast personally. I can't explain it." "Then don't," Wolfe said curtly. "Explanations require evidence, not agony." He leaned back, his chair sighing under the shift. "Mr. Goodwin, you will accompany this man to his establishment this afternoon. I wish to know what manner of idiots he employs." I nodded. "What about lunch?" "You will eat," Wolfe said, closing his eyes again. "I will not. I must consider whether I've taken leave of my senses by entertaining this caffeinated melodrama." Kent tried to thank him, but Wolfe waved him off. "Go, sir, and do not tamper with that envelope. Archie will bring it back to me intact." We left the brownstone just after 1. Outside, the November air was cold enough to make you question your life choices. Kent's office was in Chelsea. a sleek, converted warehouse that smelled like ambition and roasted beans. A brass plaque on the door read, Kent and Crown Coffee Co., in the kind of lettering that begged to be on a shopping bag. Inside, the place was buzzing with activity. Literally. Industrial roasters whirred in the back, glass-walled conference. Rooms showed off people with clipboards and caffeine jitters, and the air was thick with the scent of beans and ego. Kent led me to a side office with clean lines and expensive furniture. "This is Lila," he said, introducing a compact woman in her 30s with sharp features and sharper eyes. She nodded at me politely. "And Alan Crown, my partner." Alan was heavier, older, and looked like a man who had made peace with compromise. He shook my hand like he was signing a contract. "So you're Wolfe's legman. Thought he didn't take cases under 5 digits." "That depends on whether the case offends his palate," I said. "Yours apparently does." Crown's mouth twitched. "We'll see about that." They gave me the tour. Storage, roasting room, tasting lab. The whole operation was a caffeine cathedral, but there was tension under the hum. People glanced up from their work, whispered when we passed. Something was off. Not fear exactly, more like resentment. When we reached the tasting table, Kent poured me a cup from the latest batch. "Here, tell me what you taste." I took a sip. It wasn't poison, but it was close enough for a lawsuit. Bitter, burnt, with an aftertaste like licking a radiator. "You're right," I said. "Something's wrong. You serve this to the public, they'll start a class action for emotional damage." Kent grimaced. "Exactly. We roasted this yesterday. Same settings, same beans, same everything. The flavor shouldn't be possible." Lila crossed her arms. "We've checked everything twice. The problem's not here. Maybe the beans themselves were switched before delivery." Alan shook his head. "Or maybe your same everything isn't as identical as you think." "Meaning what?" she snapped. He turned to me. "She handles the logistics. Trucks, suppliers, scheduling. If anything gets switched, it's under her watch." "That's rich," she said. "You're the one pushing to cut costs and rush production?" Kent raised his voice. "Enough. Both of you." I made a note of the sparks. Wolfe would love this crew, like a pot left to boil over. I asked for the list of everyone with access to the roasting floor, then checked the security camera setup. It covered every angle except the loading bay, where, conveniently, the door sensor had been malfunctioning for 3 days. "Convenient," I said. Kent frowned. "We had it repaired this morning." I didn't answer. We left the factory around 4, and I promised to relay everything to Wolfe. When I got back to the brownstone, Fritz was already setting the table for dinner, and Wolfe was in his chair, reading a book on Ottoman culinary history like it held state secrets. "Well?" he asked, without looking up. I gave him the rundown. Kent's factory, the squabbling staff, the bad coffee, the broken camera. Wolfe listened, expressionless, until I finished. "Sabotage," he said softly. "But not for profit, for humiliation." "Because of the taste?" I asked. "Because the taste," he said, closing his book, "is the man's soul. To ruin it is to destroy his identity. This is not commercial, it is personal." I raised an eyebrow. "You think one of the employees is gunning for him?" "Undoubtedly, but not merely one. There is collaboration." He reached for the envelope on his desk, tapped it again. "You will call Saul Panzer in the morning. Have him examine the company's recent correspondence, particularly with this consultant, Miss Long." "Saul's going to love that," I said. "Nothing like reading coffee memos to feel alive." "Do not be glib, Archie. We are being invited to observe a duel between vanity and vengeance. The weapon, unfortunately, is flavor." And with that, he dismissed me for the night. But as I left his office, I noticed something that hadn't been there before, a faint, bitter aroma wafting from his own coffee cup on the desk. I stopped. "Wolfe?" He didn't look up. "Yes?" "Your coffee. It smells wrong." He paused, sniffed once, then frowned. "It does indeed." And that was the first time in all my years with him that Nero Wolfe looked genuinely alarmed. Wolfe didn't often look startled. He'd been known to sit through murder confessions with less reaction than a house cat. But that night, the expression that crossed his face could have stopped a clock. He set the cup down with slow precision, as if afraid it might explode, and leaned forward. His nostrils flared slightly. "Archie," he said, in a tone that would have made a general stand straighter, "take that cup to the kitchen. Have Fritz confirm what I suspect." I carried the cup out, careful not to slosh it. Fritz was polishing silver, but when I handed it to him, he caught the scent immediately. "Pfui," he muttered, frowning. "That is not the brew I made for him. Someone has ruined it." That made two of us thinking the same thing. "Ruined or replaced?" He sniffed again, more deliberate this time. "Both. The beans were not ours. The roast is wrong, flat and bitter. This is an insult." "Tell me you didn't serve it to him," I said. "I did not," Fritz replied, affronted. "I brewed from the tin we always use. It was on the shelf this afternoon, sealed." "Then someone switched it," I said. Fritz went still, the kind of stillness that means he's picturing homicide by culinary methods. "In this house?" "In this house," I confirmed. I took the tin from the shelf and pried it open. The beans inside looked fine, dark, glossy, aromatic. But the smell was wrong, harsher, missing the depth that Wolfe's private blend always had. Fritz could tell the difference blindfolded, and so could I after years of association. When I brought the tin back into the office, Wolfe's brows were drawn low enough to shade his eyes. He looked at the beans, then at me. "So," he said, "the contagion spreads." "Looks that way," I said. "You think Kent's problem followed him here?" Wolfe didn't answer right away. He pinched one bean between his fingers, rolled it, then dropped it back into the tin. "You have an excellent gift for stating the obvious, but yes, this confirms it. Whoever is responsible for corrupting Mr. Kent's blend has now dared to intrude upon my own supply, and that, Archie, I cannot abide." He leaned back, eyes closing. "We will act. First, the tin. Fritz will keep it sealed and untouched. Then, tomorrow morning, you will return to Kent's establishment. Take samples of his genuine roast and of the adulterated batches. Saul will trace the distribution channels. Ori will canvass suppliers. Someone has contaminated both streams." I was about to comment that this sounded like a lot of trouble over beans, but one look at Wolfe's expression convinced me it wasn't the time. His sense of culinary integrity was a religion, and someone had just defiled his altar. I left him to brood while I wrote up notes. Around 10, I was heading to bed when the phone rang. It was Saul Panzer, sounding brisk and amused, which meant he was already 2 steps ahead. "Goodwin? Wolfe told me to expect your call in the morning, but I got word of something tonight you might want." "Shoot." "One of Kent's suppliers filed a complaint yesterday. Said a shipment meant for Kent and Crown got redirected last minute, supposedly by a man claiming to be from their company. Only problem is, the paperwork was forged." "Where was this?" "Warehouse in Newark. The truck left, but the beans never reached Kent's plant. New delivery came the next day, labeled the same. Any idea where the first batch went?" "Not yet, but whoever signed the order used the name L. Han." I whistled softly. "That's Kent's assistant. She told me she's been handling logistics." "Then she either got framed or she's in on it," Saul said. "I'll keep digging." After I hung up, I wrote it all down for Wolfe, though I doubted he'd be asleep. Sure enough, when I checked in, he was still awake, staring at the tin of beans like it had personally insulted his ancestors. I told him what Saul had said. He listened, fingers steepled under his chin. Lila Hahn. The name did not sit comfortably when first spoken. Too precise, too guarded. She's accustomed to hiding something. We must discover what. Maybe Kent's partner's right, I said. Maybe she's cutting corners, swapping beans to save money. No, if that were all, she would not have touched my coffee. This is a message. From who? From whoever believes themselves clever enough to challenge me. His eyes opened, sharp and bright. They will regret it. That was the last word that night. By morning, the city had thawed enough for me to risk venturing out without freezing my ears off. I called Saul first, who'd already traced the delivery route. The missing shipment had been offloaded at a private storage unit in Jersey City, rented under a fake name but paid for by a company linked to Kent and Crown's marketing consultant, Beatrice Lung. I didn't need a second invitation. I called Wolfe from the car. Looks like our coffee problem comes with an advertising budget. Lung's firm signed for a mystery warehouse. Wolfe's voice over the line was calm but taut. Proceed with caution. If she's behind this, it is not for money, but power. Miss Leung is a strategist, not a saboteur. She aims to control the narrative, not destroy it. I didn't argue. He was probably right. At the warehouse, a manager showed me the unit. Inside were 6 sealed sacks of beans, same origin label as Kent's premium batch. But a quick look told me the roast was darker, burnt even. Someone had deliberately overdone them. When I lifted one sack, a paper slip fell out. It was a folded note, greasy from handling. I opened it carefully. 4 words, printed in bold black ink. Taste your failure, Gerald. That sealed it. Literally. Whoever was behind this had an agenda, and they weren't shy about theatrics. I bagged the note and took a handful of beans for Wolfe. By the time I got back to the brownstone, it was noon sharp. Wolfe was at his desk, the tin still in front of him, as if he'd spent the entire night guarding it. I handed him the evidence. He studied the beans, the note, the lot. Archie, this is not vandalism. This is a campaign. The woman, Miss Leung, she seeks to ruin Kent's credibility, possibly to wrest control of his enterprise. Sabotage the flavor, tarnish the reputation, then offer to restore it. Neat trick, I said. But how does our coffee fit in? He looked up at me. Because, Mr. Goodwin, someone wishes to prove that even Nero Wolfe can be fooled by a counterfeit cup. That made me pause. Wolfe's eyes glinted. Inform Mr. Kent that I require his presence here tonight at 8 o'clock. Bring Miss Hahn, Mr. Crown, and Miss Leung as well. I will serve them coffee. That last sentence carried so much quiet menace that even Fritz, who'd entered with a tray, froze mid-step. Wolfe took the tin from the desk, placed it beside him, and said in a low voice, Archie, we are no longer solving a case. We are defending a principle. And from the way he said it, I knew someone was about to regret underestimating the man who never left his chair. By 7 that evening, the brownstone had the atmosphere of a courtroom before the verdict. Fritz was polishing the silver with surgical precision, and Wolfe hadn't said a word in 2 hours except to request silence while he assembled the case in his mind. Which, translated from Wolfese, meant he was letting the rest of us stew while he thought circles around us. The dining room had been cleared and reset. No dinner yet, just 4 chairs placed across from. Wolfe's desk in the office, like defendants awaiting judgment. On the table sat 3 carafes, each labeled discreetly, A, B, and C. The aroma that filled the room was strong enough to sober a drunk at 50 paces. I knew that smell. Coffee roasted to Wolfe's own standards, balanced, rich, with that faint cocoa undercurrent he called the civilized whisper. At 8 sharp, the bell rang. I opened the door to find Gerald Kent first in line, followed by his assistant, Lila Hahn, Alan Crown with a face like wet granite, and finally Beatrice Leung, precise, composed, and dressed in black silk that reflected light like oil on water. They entered the office together, though not one of them looked at another. Wolfe didn't rise naturally, but he did incline his head. "Be seated," he said. The group obeyed with the sort of hesitation usually reserved for dental procedures. Kent tried a nervous smile. "Mr. Wolfe, I hope this means you've found something." Wolfe steepled his fingers. "I have found many things, Mr. Kent, though whether you will like them is another matter. But before that, we shall all partake of an experiment." He gestured toward the carafes. 3 blends, each labeled for anonymity. One is your original Mocha Elysium roast, as you intended it. The second is the corrupted batch that has tormented you. The third is the blend that was served to me this week, one that arrived, most curiously, without my consent. Kent blinked. "You mean, our problem reached you?" "It intruded," Wolfe corrected, and in doing so, revealed its architect. I began pouring. Wolfe instructed each of them to taste from identical porcelain cups. No cream, no sugar, no excuses. The air was taut with the hiss of suspicion. Beatrice Leung was the first to speak after tasting. "The first cup is balanced, elegant. The second, burnt, acidic. The third—" She paused, narrowing her eyes. "It's the same as the second, but subtler, as if someone tried to disguise the defect." Lila Hahn nodded slightly. "That's what I thought too, like it was altered twice." Kent frowned. "The second's the bad one, no question. The first is ours. I can tell." "Are you sure?" Wolfe asked. Kent hesitated, then nodded again. "Absolutely." Wolfe sighed, the kind of sigh that could flatten a man's ego. "Your certainty, Mr. Kent, is admirable. Unfortunately, it is misplaced. The first is indeed the corrupted batch." Kent sat back, eyes wide. "That's impossible." "Not impossible," Wolfe said. "Merely human." He turned slightly toward Beatrice Leung. "Miss Leung, you are in charge of the marketing campaign, yes? You were brought in to ensure that Mr. Kent's vision reached the masses." Her expression didn't flicker. "That's correct." "And you find his vision suitable?" "I find it impractical," she said evenly. "He's an artist in an industry that requires pragmatism. He insists on methods that cost twice as much and scale half as well." "So," Wolfe said, "you sought to illustrate his folly." She tilted her head. "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, but you do." Wolfe's tone grew colder. "You created the illusion of sabotage. You redirected a shipment through a shell company, altered the roast to taste defective, and allowed suspicion to fall internally. Your goal was to make Mr. Crown question his partner's competence, to fracture the company and allow your firm to take control of the product line." Crown's chair creaked as he turned. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Wolfe murmured. "Miss Leung's firm is named as secondary beneficiary as in your distribution contract. Should Kent and Crown dissolve, her agency gains ownership of the Mocha Elysium trademark. A clever clause, buried in legal embroidery." Beatrice's lips parted just enough for a breath. "That's confidential." "It was," Wolfe said, "until this afternoon. I had Saul Panzer retrieve the relevant documents. You overreached, Miss Leung. The counterfeit roast you distributed was too deliberate. Even the one left for me, your attempt to mock the arbiter of taste, betrayed a certain vanity." She folded her arms. "You can't prove I roasted anything." "Nor need I," Wolfe said. "Mr. Goodwin located the warehouse where the altered beans were stored. The lease was paid by a consulting firm owned, how quaintly, by your younger brother. I imagine the forgery of Lila Hahn's signature was his handiwork." Lila's eyes flashed. "You forged my name?" Beatrice didn't answer. Kent stared at her, stunned. "Why? You could have ruined everything, my reputation, my company." "That," she said quietly, "was the point. You were the brand, Gerald. All genius, no discipline. They'd replace you with me if they lost faith in your perfection. I gave them reason. The silence that followed could have been ladled. Wolfe finally broke it. You are eloquent in your confession, Miss Long, though I should prefer it less self-serving. I will assume, for my peace, that you intended no physical harm, merely psychological and financial. Beatrice looked at him, her expression hardening. You're not the police. You can't do anything. True, Wolfe said. But I can ensure that Mr. Kent's attorney receives a full transcript of this conversation, recorded, naturally. Her composure slipped then. You're bluffing. Wolfe reached to his right and, with deliberate calm, clicked a small switch on a wire recorder beneath the desk. The faint hum filled the room like a ghost of her certainty. Dying. Goodwin, Wolfe said, escort Miss Lung to the door. Mr. Kent, you may wish to consider restructuring your partnerships. Mr. Crown, perhaps you will finally pursue that grocery ambition now that no one is poisoning your beans. And Miss Hahn, rest assured, your good name is restored. You may all leave. They did, one by one, like chastened students. Beatrice went last, silent and pale, though her eyes held a glint that promised she wasn't finished. When the door finally closed, Wolfe let out a long, controlled breath and reached for the carafe labeled A. He poured himself a cup, sniffed, and took a slow sip. His eyes closed. Perfection, he said softly, uncorrupted. I watched him a moment, then said, You realize she's not going to take this lying down. I expect not, he replied. But she will not strike again. Her kind requires admiration to thrive. Deprive her of audience, and she withers. I leaned back in my chair. You could have told me earlier this was about your coffee being bait. He gave me a sidelong glance. Would you have believed me? Probably not, I admitted. Then I was wise to withhold it. He took another sip, his mood mellowing. It is remarkable, Archie, how ambition often disguises itself as sophistication. The palate, however, is incorruptible. It knows truth even when men lie. I couldn't resist. You should embroider that on a napkin. He ignored me, of course. But later, as Fritz served dinner, a fine pheasant and naturally fresh coffee, Wolfe raised his cup in quiet ceremony. To flavor, so he said. I lifted mine. And to the woman who learned you don't mess with it. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. Indeed, human folly, Archie, is like an over-roast. Once burnt, there is no restoring it. And just like that, the case was closed. The brownstone silent again, save for the faint clink of porcelain and the aroma of justice brewed to perfection. The next morning began the way most mornings should in a civilized household, with silence, the aroma of breakfast, and the understanding that conversation was not to commence until the first sip of coffee had been properly appreciated. Fritz was serving eggs with black truffle, and Wolfe was already in his chair, a newspaper unfolded in front of him like a ceremonial shield. Everything in the room was normal again, or so it seemed. It wasn't. At exactly 8:15, the doorbell rang. Wolfe glanced toward me, eyebrows twitching with annoyance. Pooh! Who presumes at this hour? I went to check, and what I found standing on the stoop nearly made me spill my own coffee. It was Gerald Kent again, hat in hand, eyes wide and hollow. He looked like he hadn't slept, shaved, or blinked since the night before. I ushered him in. Mr. Wolfe, I said as I closed the door behind Kent. You've got a repeat visitor. He looks like he's seen a ghost, or maybe just read his own obituary. Wolfe sighed heavily, folding his newspaper. Mr. Kent, you have already had your catharsis. What now? Kent's voice was low but urgent. Miss Lung is dead. That got Wolfe's full attention. He didn't stand, of course. He wouldn't for the second coming, but his eyes snapped, open, sharp as glass. Explain. She was found this morning in her apartment, Kent said, swallowing hard. Gas leak. Well, that's what they're saying, but it's too neat, too sudden. After last night, I thought you should know. I whistled softly. Gas leak, huh? Convenient timing. Wolfe's gaze turned inward. He tapped a finger against the arm of his chair. Convenient is rarely coincidental. When was she discovered? This morning, just after 7. The paper will have it by noon. I could already see the wheels turning in Wolfe's head. He detested coincidences the way he detested lukewarm coffee. Archie, he said finally, call Inspector Kramer. That earned him a raised eyebrow from me. You want Kramer in on this? He's still sore about the poultry case. He will recover. Tell him I have information pertaining to the sudden demise of Beatrice Long. I called Kramer's office, and within the hour, he was stomping into the brownstone, smelling of tobacco and civic irritation. He gave me a curt nod and went straight for Wolfe. You got a habit of calling me only when someone's dead. I suppose congratulations are in order. Wolfe didn't bother with greetings. You have been to Miss Long's apartment? Yeah, gas leak all right. Stove knob turned just enough to release a steady stream. No sign of struggle. Coroner's leaning accidental, but I'm not. Of course you're not, Wolfe said dryly. You're a policeman. Suspicion is your métier. Tell me, was anything unusual in the room? Kramer grunted. Plenty. Half-finished cup of coffee on the counter, fresh roast in the grinder. I know you'll find that poetic. Wolfe's eyes glimmered. Indeed I do. And the beans? Kramer frowned. You'll love this. They were from Kent and Crown. Branded bag. You telling me that means something? I'm telling you it means everything, Wolfe replied. Miss Long, even in defeat, wished to control the narrative. But someone else seized it from her. Kent looked up sharply. You mean she wasn't? Wolfe waved a dismissive hand. Suicide is possible, but improbable. Miss Long was far too enamored with her own brilliance to extinguish it so inelegantly. More likely, someone found it expedient to silence her before she could speak further. Speak about what? Kramer asked. Her confession, Wolfe said, his voice low. You recall, Inspector, that last night she admitted to corporate subterfuge. That recording exists. Kramer's eyes narrowed. You mean to tell me you've got her voice on tape admitting she faked the sabotage? Precisely. He exhaled through his nose, half amusement, half irritation. You realize that makes you a witness, not a bystander. I'm a citizen, Wolfe replied. And as such, I fulfill my duty by providing you the facts. But I have no intention of becoming embroiled in your procedural morass. Kramer muttered something that probably wasn't printable and gestured for the tape. I fetched it from the safe. As he examined it, Kent sat pale and silent, twisting his hat in his hands. When Kramer left, after promising to keep us out of his damn headlines, Wolfe turned his attention back to Kent. Mr. Kent, I assume this development compels you to consider the future of your enterprise. Miss Lung's death, while regrettable, clears certain obstacles, yet it raises new ones. Kent rubbed his temples. I don't care about the business right now. I just want to know who could have done this. She had enemies, sure, but none who'd... Wolfe interrupted. You underestimate the appetite for silence among those who profit from deceit. Miss Lung's confession exposed not only her motives, but others who may have shared them. You mean Alan. I mean everyone with something to gain or lose, Wolfe said. Miss Han, for instance, whose name was forged on incriminating documents. Mr. Crown, who now inherits unchallenged control. Even you, Mr. Kent, might appear an unlikely beneficiary of tragedy. Kent stared. You think I... Good God, Wolfe. I think nothing yet, Wolfe said. I observe. And observation tells me that the hand which tampered with beans, documents, and recordings would not hesitate to turn a knob. That hung in the air. I walked him out later, and as I locked the door, Wolfe called after me, "Archie, you will pay a visit to Miss Lung's apartment this afternoon, quietly. Bring back anything of interest, especially notes, correspondence, or evidence of recent meetings. Kramer won't like me sniffing around his scene. Kramer will tolerate it if you are discreet." So I went. The place was modern, expensive, and smelled faintly of gas despite the clean-up. There were fashion magazines on the table, unopened mail on the counter, and a sense of abrupt interruption. In the wastebasket by the desk, I found a crumpled sheet of stationery, half burnt at one edge, as if someone had tried and failed to destroy it. I smoothed it out carefully. It was written in Beatrice's neat hand. "Meet me tonight. One last negotiation. Bring your conscience." No name, no address, no signature, but it was dated the night she died. I took it back to Wolfe, who read it twice, then set it aside. She intended to meet someone, likely one of her former co-conspirators. Someone she believed could be persuaded or forgiven. Instead, that person ensured there would be no negotiation. "Which means one of the survivors from last night's little coffee clatch paid her a visit," I said. "Exactly," he murmured. "But which one? Mr. Crown, the opportunist? Miss Han, the wronged subordinate? Or Mr. Kent, the humiliated artist? Each has motive, each had opportunity, and one of them now believes the roast is finished." He leaned back, eyes half closed, and for a moment the silence thickened like smoke. Then he opened them again. "Archie, tomorrow morning you will invite them all back." I groaned. "Another tasting?" He smiled faintly. "Not of coffee, of conscience." And as he said it, I knew the next gathering at the Brownstone wouldn't be about beans or branding. It would be about murder. I don't know how Wolfe does it, but by morning he always looks as if he spent the night in a monastery instead of plotting moral ambushes. He was at his desk before I'd finished breakfast, surrounded by the calm of a man who already knows the outcome of a game no one else realizes they're playing. Fritz hovered nearby as though one wrong move might disrupt the gravitational pull of Wolfe's thinking. He didn't speak until I'd set down my coffee cup. "The invitations have been delivered." "They have," I said. "Kent, Crown, and Hahn. Noon sharp. You sure about this? Kramer's going to have kittens if he finds out you're holding court again." "Kramer will have them regardless," Wolfe murmured. "I prefer he do so productively. We shall give him his murderer, neatly wrapped." "Assuming we've got one," I said, "we still don't know who Beatrice met that night." "We do not know," Wolfe said, "but we can deduce. The letter you found was a test of conscience. Miss Lung sought reassurance from one of her accomplices, someone whose moral elasticity she misjudged. The result was fatal. The question, therefore, is not who could have visited her, but who would have felt the need to prove they still held the upper hand." "That narrows it down to about 3 people," I said. "Precisely." He leaned back, eyes half shut. "The guilty one will reveal themselves. Not through confession, but through inconsistency. They will say too little or too much. You will observe." "Meaning I play the social host while you pull the strings," I said. "As ever." By noon, the office looked exactly as it had 2 nights before. The same chairs, the same heavy air, only this time the tension had texture. Wolfe sat immovable, a mountain of suspicion behind the desk, while I showed our guests in. Kent came first, looking worse for wear. He was pale, and his hands trembled when he set his hat down. Crown followed, brisk and businesslike, his expression unreadable. Lila Han arrived last, composed but wary, her eyes flicking around the room like she expected an ambush, which, in a sense, she was right about. When they'd all taken their seats, Wolfe began. "Miss Leung's death," he said, his voice as smooth as the varnish on his desk, "has altered the complexion of this affair. It compels inquiry not into coffee, but into conscience." Kent shifted uneasily. I already told Inspector Kramer everything. I was home all night. Doubtless, Wolfe said, as was Mr. Crown, as was Miss Han. You're all commendably stationary. Yet one of you was not. One of you found it necessary to ensure Miss Lung would never again open her mouth. An act performed with deliberation and, I suspect, misplaced justification. Lila frowned. You think one of us killed her? That's absurd. Absurdity, Wolfe said, is the refuge of the cornered mind. Permit me to proceed. He turned his gaze on Crown. Mr. Crown, your partnership with Mr. Kent, has it improved since last we spoke? Crown hesitated. We're trying to keep the company stable. Investors are nervous, naturally. Indeed. And you now hold primary control, since Miss Lung's influence is removed. That wasn't her company to control, he snapped. Precisely why she frightened you, Wolfe said mildly. You feared she might use your internal conflicts to gain leverage. Convenient, then, that she should perish before exploiting that advantage. Crown's jaw tightened. Are you accusing me? I am observing, Wolfe said. As I do with Miss Han, who, though exonerated of forgery, now finds her professional future uncertain. Her loyalty to Mr. Kent was commendable, perhaps too commendable. Lila straightened, eyes flashing. I was loyal because he deserved it. Beatrice was manipulating him, making him doubt himself. I wanted to protect the company. Wolfe's gaze didn't waver. Protection, Miss Han, takes many forms. Some gentle, some terminal. She froze. Kent leaned forward, voice breaking. Stop it. Both of them have lost enough. We all have. Beatrice, she brought this on herself. Did she? Wolfe asked quietly. Then you knew she might come to harm. Kent blinked. No, that's not what I meant. Yet you said it, Wolfe murmured. You share with Miss Lung an artist's temperament, volatile, proud, quick to moralize when threatened. Did you meet her last night, Mr. Kent? Of course not. Wolfe let the denial hang like smoke, then shifted his attention. Miss Han, I require your recollection of the past evening. I went home after work, she said. I called Mr. Kent around 9 to discuss an order. That's all. Mr. Crown, I was at a dinner meeting until 11. Ask anyone who was there. I shall, Wolfe said. He reached for something on his desk, an envelope, neatly sealed. Before doing so, I will read a passage from a letter found in Miss Lung's possession. It was unfinished, yet illuminating. He opened it and began. I believe I was wrong about you. You have the courage to do what I could not. Tonight I will give you the proof you need. He looked up. The room was silent. That, he said softly, was addressed to Mr. Kent. Kent went white. That's not possible. She expected you, Wolfe said. She wrote your name on the envelope. I imagine you visited her, intending to persuade her to retract her confession or destroy the recording. Perhaps you believed her death accidental. Perhaps you convinced yourself she turned the gas on herself. But you were there, Mr. Kent. Kent stood abruptly, face contorted. You don't know what you're talking about. I know, Wolfe said. That guilt emits an odor even more pungent than burnt coffee. Sit down. For a moment, I thought Kent might bolt, but he didn't. He sank back into the chair, staring at his hands. I didn't mean for her to die, he said finally. She was going to ruin everything, the company, the product. It was all I had left. I went to talk. She wouldn't listen. She said she'd already told you everything, that I was finished. And so, Wolfe said, you turned the knob, to silence her, to restore your illusion of control. Kent's shoulders sagged. I didn't think. She was fine when I left. She said she was making tea. Crown swore under his breath. Lila looked away. I crossed to the phone and Wolfe nodded once. When I called Kramer, his voice was all gravel and disbelief, but he sent a car. By the time they led Kent out, The room was heavy with that familiar post-mortem quiet, the one that comes when justice feels more like defeat. Wolfe sat motionless, eyes closed, until the sound of the door faded. When I finally asked if he wanted coffee, he said, "No, the aroma of guilt lingers too long. Even I cannot palate that." But 10 minutes later, I saw him reach for his cup anyway. When Kramer left with Kent in custody, the brownstone exhaled as if the building itself had been holding its breath through the entire confession. I stood by the window, watching the unmarked sedan pull away. The street outside was quiet, the November air heavy with drizzle. Inside, the smell of coffee had gone cold, rich, bitter, and faintly accusing. Wolfe hadn't moved since Kent's departure. He sat with his hands folded over his stomach, eyes half-lidded, the picture of calm that could only come after intellectual conquest. Fritz entered silently, collected the untouched cups, and retreated. The click of the kitchen door sounded louder than it should have. I waited a full minute before speaking. "So that's it?" Wolfe's eyes opened. "It is seldom it, Archie. There are always residues. Human affairs leave sediment, much like coffee grounds. They cloud what should be clear." "Meaning what exactly?" He looked at me, and his expression softened by a degree. "Meaning that Mr. Kent's guilt is genuine, but not pure. Miss Leung's death was unpremeditated, yet the moral corruption that led to it, ambition, vanity, fear, that was distilled long before." I poured myself another cup and leaned against the desk. "You could have left it to Kramer, you know. Let him figure out who turned the gas. Would have saved you a morning's aggravation." Wolfe's mouth twitched. "Kramer is a competent man within his sphere. Unfortunately, his sphere ends where reflection begins. This case was not about evidence, Archie. It was about flavor, the bitter aftertaste of deceit." I grinned. "You should write that down. Put it on a coffee tin." He ignored me, naturally. His gaze drifted to the window. "You see, the tragedy here is not Miss Leung's death, nor even Mr. Kent's ruin. It is the waste of talent, the misuse of intellect in pursuit of vanity. Miss Leung was clever, imaginative, formidable, but she lacked restraint. And Kent, for all his artistry, mistook passion for integrity." "Maybe they were just people," I said. "Flawed, stupid, desperate people who made bad choices. You can dress it up in philosophy, but it still comes down to someone opening a gas valve." He inclined his head. "True, yet philosophy is the only means by which stupidity achieves meaning." I was about to argue when the phone rang. Wolfe frowned, gesturing for me to answer. It was Kramer. His voice was gruff but not hostile. "Goodwin, tell your boss he was right." "Mostly." "Kent broke down at the precinct? Signed a statement. Says it was an accident, same as he told you. Jury'll call it manslaughter if he's lucky. But get this. The lab boys ran a test on that coffee cup from Leung's kitchen. Found traces of chloroform. That got my attention." "Chloroform?" "Yeah. Someone drugged her before the gas ever got her. Kent claims he didn't bring it. Says she must have done it herself. You buy that?" I didn't. Neither did Wolfe when I repeated it. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to that low, measured rumble that meant his mind was sharpening its knives. "Chloroform," he murmured. "A woman as meticulous as Miss Leung would not employ such a clumsy instrument. Nor would Mr. Kent have known how to procure it on short notice. Yet someone did. Someone who understood the situation well enough to shape it." "You think there's another player?" I asked. "I think," Wolfe said, "that Miss Hahn's silence this morning was more eloquent than speech." I frowned. Lila. She looked shocked as the rest. "Indeed," he said softly. "But shock may conceal relief. If she discovered Kent had gone to Miss Leung's apartment, and if she followed to intervene, she could have found a way to make sure Leung didn't talk again." I finished. Wolfe nodded once, almost regretfully. "A pragmatic woman, protective, capable of decisive action under stress. Precisely the temperament that thrives in business and in murder born of misplaced loyalty. Kramer won't take your word for it, I said. Kramer will take evidence, Wolfe replied, and she will provide it. She will come here, soon, compelled by guilt or fear. Either will suffice. He was right. He always is, though I try not to admit it often. Less than an hour later, the doorbell rang again. I opened it to find Lila Hahn standing on the stoop, rain in her hair, eyes red but steady. She didn't wait for me to invite her in. I had to see him, she said. Please, just for a moment. I led her to the office. Wolfe looked up, his face unreadable. She clasped her hands. You already know, don't you? I seldom invite guests merely to confirm what I do not know, he said gently. Her composure cracked. I didn't mean for it to happen. She was angry, threatening to expose everything, destroy Gerald, ruin the company. I went there to stop her. She wouldn't listen. We argued. She reached for her coffee. She didn't know I'd put something in it. I only wanted her to calm down. The words spilled out, raw and final. When she finished, Wolfe inclined his head, grave but not cruel. You acted from loyalty, Miss Hahn, but loyalty without wisdom is merely servitude. You traded one master for another, fear. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. Will you tell the police? I do not tell, Miss Hahn, he said. I inform. You will accompany Mr. Goodwin to Inspector Kramer and repeat what you have told me. It is the only redemption left. She nodded once, silently, and followed me out. When I returned, Wolfe was pouring himself a fresh cup. The room filled again with the scent of dark roast and resignation. He took one slow sip, then said, At last, Archie, the brew is clean. I didn't answer. For once, there was nothing left to say. When Lila left with me that afternoon, it was raining hard enough to wash the city clean if it had anything left worth saving. She didn't speak in the cab, just stared out the window, her reflection flickering against the glass. I could see her rehearsing what she'd tell Kramer, though we both knew it wouldn't matter. Once you've poured the truth, there's no unpouring it. Kramer met us at homicide, and his face went from suspicion to grim satisfaction as she confessed. He didn't gloat, not exactly. He respected Wolfe too much for that. But there was something in his eyes that said he'd finally gotten the whole pot brewed. When she was done, he asked me to sign a statement confirming Wolfe had predicted she'd come forward. I did, though it felt strange, like writing the last line of a story you weren't sure you wanted finished. By the time I got back to the brownstone, the rain had stopped, but the house smelled different. Fritz had opened the windows to air it out, and the orchids upstairs gave the place a faint sweetness, something clean and alive to cover the residue of the case. Wolfe was at his desk, naturally, the afternoon paper folded beside him, a glass of beer standing half full. She has confessed? He asked without looking up. She has, I said. Kramer's satisfied. Says it's one for the books. Kent will face manslaughter, and Miss Hahn gets the accessory charge. He actually said, and I quote, Wolfe's cleaned up another mess the DA didn't know he had. I think that's as close as he'll ever come to saying, thank you. Wolfe grunted. Kramer's vocabulary does not extend to gratitude. He's human, I said. That's close enough. He looked at me then, that faint gleam of fatigue behind the eyes he'd never admit to. Humanity, he said slowly, is a generous abstraction, Archie. I find little of it in the residue of this affair. I poured myself a cup from the fresh pot Fritz had made. It was perfect, strong, even-handed, aromatic. After the past few days, it tasted almost innocent. You think Lila's confession makes her less human? Quite the opposite, he said. It makes her entirely human. To harm out of fear, to justify cruelty as protection, those are our species' most practiced arts. What disgusts me, Archie, is not that she erred, but that she believed her error virtuous. He gestured toward the orchids beyond the open door of the plant rooms. Those, at least, bloom without deceit. I smiled faintly. And yet you still prefer your orchids to people. An inevitable choice, he said. Orchids do not lie to themselves. We sat in silence for a while, both of us listening to the faint hum of the city outside. It was the kind of quiet that settles after too much truth has been spoken. Wolfe broke it first. You realize, Archie, that Miss Lung's death was not the true crime. The true crime was in the intent preceding it. 3 minds conspiring, each for self-interest, each believing they could manipulate the others without consequence. Such alliances always curdle. Like cream in bad coffee, I said. He gave a small, approving nod. Precisely. And yet, had they chosen honesty, plain beans, properly roasted, none of this would have occurred. Deception, like over-roasting, destroys subtlety. I raised my cup in mock salute. To subtlety, then, and to the man who guards it from corruption. He didn't smile, but the corner of his mouth softened. You mock, but I will accept the toast. I took a sip. What about Kent? You think he meant to kill her? No, Wolfe said. He meant to restore control. He believed if he silenced Miss Lung, he could resurrect his craft unblemished. But one cannot cleanse bitterness by adding more. It accumulates layer upon layer until the flavor itself is unrecognizable. Funny, I said. That's almost poetic. It is chemistry, he replied. Fritz appeared then with a tray, cold roast beef, warm bread, and a small pot of coffee. Wolfe nodded for him to pour. The aroma filled the office again, rich and grounding. For the first time in days, the brownstone felt right. Wolfe raised his cup, inspected the color, then took a slow sip. His eyes closed briefly. Perfect, he said. That's how it should end, I told him. He looked up at me, his gaze steady. No, Archie. Nothing ends. The world continues to brew. We simply choose which cup to drink from. I didn't argue. He was right, as usual. The rain had stopped, the air was clear, and inside the brownstone, peace, temporary, delicate, and fragrant, had returned. Dinner followed, of course, and afterward Wolfe said nothing for a long time. When he finally spoke, it was more to himself than to me. The tragedy of flavor, Archie, is that it reveals truth too late. Once the bitterness sets in, no amount of sweetness can erase it. I raised an eyebrow. And yet you keep drinking. He looked at his cup, thoughtful. Because, he said quietly, even bitterness, when understood, has its place. And that was that. The last of the storm drained away outside, and the brownstone settled into its familiar rhythm. The house of a man who fought chaos not with weapons, but with words, wit, and the unyielding pursuit of balance in every cup. The following day unfolded with the strange stillness that always follows a storm, too calm, too polite, as if the city itself had decided to whisper out of respect for the dead. The brownstone, however, had already returned to its rhythms. Fritz was humming softly in the kitchen. The orchids had been misted, and Wolfe was reading the morning paper with the same detached absorption as though it were a geological report. You wouldn't have guessed that 48 hours earlier, the place had hosted confession, betrayal, and murder. I came in with the second mail delivery. Wolfe didn't look up. Bills or correspondence? Both, and a letter from Kenton Crown's attorney. He grunted, which in Wolfian dialect means proceed. I opened the envelope. They're dissolving the partnership. Crown's buying out Kent's share through a third party. Guess business moves faster than conscience. Predictable, Wolfe murmured. Commerce always absorbs morality last. Continue. They also enclosed a note for you. I passed it over. Wolfe adjusted his glasses. Read it once, then again, his mouth tightening slightly. "It's from Crown," he said. "He thanks me for my discretion and encloses a token of gratitude, an absurd check for $5,000. I whistled. "I'll get the deposit slip." He folded the paper with deliberate care. "You will not. Return it. Tell Mr. Crown that I do not accept remuneration from men who profit through convenient deaths." I watched him for a moment. "You think he's guilty of something too?" "Guilt," Wolfe said, "is not confined to legality. Mr. Crown has acquired his business, his rival's downfall, and his own vindication in one efficient transaction. That, to him, constitutes success. To me, it is carrion with coffee beans." I let that sit. You can't argue with a man who measures ethics by flavor. "So that's the end, then." "The end of what?" "The case. The client. The circus." He looked up, his expression unreadable. "There is no end, Archie. Only digestion." I was still considering that when the phone rang. I picked it up. Nero Wolfe's office, Archie Goodwin speaking. A male voice, low and tired, answered. "This is Alan Crown. Please tell Mr. Wolfe he was right about Kent, about everything, but he was wrong about me." Wolfe's head tilted. "Put him on the speaker, Archie." I did. "Explain yourself, Mr. Crown," Wolfe said. "There's nothing to explain," Crown replied. "Only something to deliver. You should know that the Mocha Elysium formula, Kent's formula, is gone, erased. The master record, the sample logs, the blend ratios, everything. Someone broke into the plant last night. It wasn't theft. It was erasure. The product's finished." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Destroyed intentionally?" "Yes. We had security footage. It shows a woman wearing a hooded coat, about Lila Hahn's height." He hesitated. "Except Miss Hahn was already in custody by that time." The silence that followed was taut. Wolfe's gaze drifted toward the orchids, unfocused but intense. "Then it was someone else," he said. "Someone who understood what needed to vanish before it could be resold." Crown's voice dropped. "I think it was Kent's wife. She came to the factory this morning, demanding his notes. When we told her everything was gone, she just smiled, said it was better that way, that his art shouldn't survive him." He hung up without another word. Wolfe closed his eyes. "Ah, the final act of loyalty. Destruction as preservation. I should have foreseen it." "Would it have changed anything?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "No. But it completes the pattern. Each participant in this affair sought control and found ruin. Mr. Kent sought immortality and flavor and achieved infamy. Miss Leung sought power and achieved oblivion. Miss Hahn sought to protect and became the instrument of death. And Mrs. Kent, she restores the balance by annihilating what remains. Perfect symmetry." I leaned against the desk. "You sound almost admiring." "Not admiring," he said softly. "Resigned. Perfection in ruin is still perfection." Fritz entered then, discreet as a whisper, carrying 2 cups of freshly brewed coffee. He placed one by Wolfe's elbow and one by mine. The aroma rose, dark and warm, like the closing curtain of a long, weary play. Wolfe lifted his cup, sniffed, and nodded approvingly. "No bitterness," he said. "None at all," I agreed. "Guess we finally got the blend right." He looked at me over the rim of his cup. "For now, perhaps." Outside, the sun broke through the thinning clouds, striking the wet leaves until they gleamed. Inside, the air was still, the brownstone once again untouched by the world's foolishness. Wolfe took a slow sip and set his cup down with deliberate precision, his voice almost a whisper. "Even perfection," he said, "must be tasted before it fades." And with that, the matter of the Mocha cup, of ambition, deceit, and the bitter end of human flavor, was finally, irrevocably, finished. By the next morning, The brownstone had resumed its usual temperature, calm, precise, and insulated from the world's chaos. Fritz was humming in the kitchen again, the orchids were blooming obediently under their glass canopy, and Wolfe had resumed his morning ritual of pretending not to read the mail while waiting for me to summarize it aloud. In other words, everything was back where it belonged. Almost. The papers were full of the Mocha Elysium affair. They called it the coffee murders, which Wolfe found intolerably crude. The headlines listed the deaths in tidy order: Leung, Kent, and the moral accomplice, Leila Han, and speculated endlessly about corporate rivalry, obsession, and the seductive power of flavor. Wolfe read the first paragraph, made a noise like a disgusted walrus, and handed the paper back to me. "Archie," he said, "you see? This is why civilization teeters. They transform tragedy into entertainment. The intellect is ignored, the lesson lost." I folded the paper. "People like simple stories, not moral lectures." "People," he said coldly, "also like canned soup. I do not adjust my palate to the lowest taste." That was the end of that conversation. I spent the rest of the morning finishing the case notes, though I didn't need to. Wolfe already had the entire thing arranged in his mind like a perfect roast profile, each fact evenly distributed, each motive evenly roasted, no bitterness left unaccounted for. Around noon, Saul dropped by to return the copies of the contracts he'd dug up. He took one look at Wolfe's expression and decided not to linger. When he was gone, I poured 2 cups of coffee and placed one on Wolfe's desk. He sniffed it, nodded approvingly, and said, "This, at least, remains uncorrupted." "Funny," I said. "I was just thinking the same about you." He looked at me over the rim of his cup. "You think me incorruptible?" "Not exactly," I said. "Just hard to tamper with. Like a recipe nobody else can quite duplicate." He grunted, which I took as agreement. After a while, I asked him the thing that had been sitting in my head since the night Kent confessed. "Do you think he really meant it to happen, or was it just another one of those accidents you claim don't exist?" Wolfe's gaze drifted toward the window. Mr. Kent acted out of desperation, the final refuge of the self-absorbed. He mistook control for virtue. When cornered, he sought to preserve his creation, not his conscience. That distinction, Archie, is the difference between an artist and a fool. "And Miss Han?" "A victim of devotion," he said quietly. "The kind who mistakes loyalty for morality. She feared losing the man she served, so she served his ruin instead. That is the most common form of tragedy. Love stripped of judgment." He took another sip, his eyes half closed. Miss Leung, Mr. Kent, Miss Han, all 3 succumbed to a single poison, and it was not chloroform, it was vanity. "Vanity?" He nodded. "The vanity of believing one can command flavor, truth, or love without first mastering restraint. Even bitterness, properly understood, has its harmony. They sought purity through dominance, and purity, Archie, cannot be coerced." That was classic Wolfe. Turning murder into a sermon, then a metaphor, and finally into something you almost believed was wisdom. The afternoon light slanted across the office, glinting off the glass carafe. The case files lay stacked in front of me, neat, final, harmless now. Wolfe leaned back, the picture of contentment, as if the world had once again settled into its proper orbit around his chair. After a while, I said, "So what happens to the Mocha Elysium blend?" "Crown said it's gone." "Good," Wolfe said. "Some things deserve extinction. Not every creation merits resurrection." "That's a pretty final judgment," I said. He gave a small, satisfied sigh. "As all judgments must be." I looked at him for a moment, the big man sitting there in his fortress of reason, sunlight touching the gold rims of his spectacles, the faint scent of orchids drifting in from the next room. For a man who never moved, Nero Wolfe managed to shift the world around him. "Archie," he said suddenly. Yeah? Do not let Fritz alter the roast tomorrow. He has been experimenting. Noted, I said. I'd hate to see you charge him with sabotage. Indeed, he murmured. There has been enough of that. We sat in silence again. 2 men and 2 cups of coffee, the steam rising between us like a truce. Outside, New York went on being itself, loud, restless, unfiltered. Inside, the brownstone held its peace, wrapped in the quiet dignity of survival. When Wolfe finally spoke, it was in that low, deliberate tone that meant he was addressing more than just me. Archie, he said, there is a moral to every flavor if one has the discipline to taste it. I smiled. And this one? He looked into his cup. That bitterness, like truth, is only unbearable to those who fear they deserve it. He drained the cup, set it down with precision, and closed his eyes. That was how it ended. The great Nero Wolfe, philosopher of palate and justice alike, restored once more to his solitude, and me, his chronicler, making sure the world didn't forget that even in a city where everything burns fast, there are still a few men who know how to taste before they swallow, 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 before they swallow.